Chapter 2 of the Second Geneva Convention. Wounded, sick, and shipwrecked. Article 12. Members of the armed forces and other persons mentioned in the following article who are at sea and who are wounded, sick, or shipwrecked shall be respected and protected in all circumstances, it being understood that the term shipwreck means shipwreck from any cause and includes forced landings at sea by or from aircraft. Such persons shall be treated humanely and cared for by the parties to the conflict in whose power they may be without any adverse distinction founded on sex, race, nationality, religion, political opinions, or any other similar criteria. Any attempts upon the lives or violence to their persons shall be strictly prohibited. In particular, they shall not be murdered or exterminated, subject to torture, or to biological experiments. They shall not willfully be left without medical assistance and care, nor shall conditions exposing them to contagion or infection be created. Only urgent medical reasons will authorize priority in the order of treatment to be administered. Women shall be treated with all consideration due to their sex. Article 13. The present convention shall apply to the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked at sea belonging to the following categories. Members of the armed forces of a party to the conflict, as well as members of militias or volunteer corps forming part of such armed forces, members of other militias, and members of other volunteer corps, including those of organized resistance movements, belonging to a party to the conflict and operating in or outside their own territory, even if this territory is occupied, provided that such militias or volunteer corps, including such organized resistance movements, fulfill the following conditions. A. That of being commanded by a person responsible for his subordinates. B. That of having a fixed distinctive sign recognizable at a distance. C. That of carrying arms openly. D. That of conducting their operations in accordance with the laws and customs of war. Members of regular armed forces who profess allegiance to a government or authority not recognized by the detaining power. Persons who accompany armed forces without actually being members thereof, such as civilian members of military aircraft crews, war correspondents, supply contractors, member of labor units, or of services responsible for the welfare of the armed forces, provided that they have received authorization from the armed forces which they accompany. Members of crew, including master pilots and apprentices of the merchant marine and the crews of civil aircraft of the parties to the conflict, who do not benefit by more favorable treatment under any other provisions of international law. Inhabitants of a non-occupied territory who, upon the approach of the enemy, spontaneously take up arms to resist the invading forces without having had time to form themselves into regular armed units, provided they carry weapons openly and respect the laws and customs of war. Article 14. All warships of a belligerent party shall have the right to demand that the wounded, sick, or shipwrecked on board military hospital ships and hospital ships belonging to relief societies or to private individuals, as well as merchant vessels, yachts, other craft, shall be surrendered, whatever their nationality, provided that the wounded and sick are in a fit state to be moved, and that the warship can provide adequate facilities for necessary medical treatment. Article 15. If wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons are taken on board a neutral warship or a neutral military aircraft, it shall be ensured, where so required by international law, that they can take no further part in operations of war. Article 16. Subject to the provisions of Article 12, the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked of a belligerent who fall into enemy hands shall be the prisoners of war. All the provisions of international law concerning prisoners of war shall apply to them. The captor may decide according to circumstances whether it is expedient to hold them or to convey them to a port in the captor's own country, to a neutral port, or even to a port in enemy territory. In the last case, prisoners of war thus returned to their home country may not serve for the duration of the war. Article 17. Wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons who are landed in neutral ports with the consent of local authorities shall, failing arrangements to the contrary between neutral and belligerent powers, be so guarded by the neutral power, where so required by international law, that the said persons cannot again take part in the operations of war. The cost of hospital accommodation and interment shall be borne by the power on whom the wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons depend. Article 18. After each engagement, parties to the conflict shall without delay take all possible measures to search for and collect shipwrecked, wounded, sick, and to protect them against pillage, ill treatment, and to ensure their adequate care, and to search for the dead and prevent their being despoiled. Whenever circumstances permit, the parties to the conflict shall conclude local arrangements for the removal of the wounded and sick by sea from a besieged or encircled area, and for the passage of medical and religious personnel and equipment on their way to that area. Article 19. The parties to the conflict shall record as soon as possible, in respect of each shipwrecked, wounded, sick, or dead persons of the adverse party falling into their hands, any particulars which may assist in his identification. These records should, if possible, include: A. Designation of the power on which he depends. B. Army regimental personal or serial number. C. Surnames. D. First names or names. E. Date of birth. F. Any other particulars shown on his identity card or disc. G. Date and place of capture or death. H. Particulars concerning wounds, illness, or cause of death. As soon as possible, the above-mentioned information shall be forwarded to the Information Bureau described in Article 122 of the Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, August 12, 1945, which shall transmit this information to the power on which these persons depend through the intermediary of the protecting power and of the Central Prisoners of War Agency. Parties to the conflict shall prepare and forward to each other through the same bureau certificates of death or duly authenticated lists of the dead. They shall likewise collect and forward through the same bureau one half of the double identity disc or the identity disc itself if it's a single disc. Last wills or other documents of importance to the next of kin, money, and in general all articles of intrinsic sentimental value which are found on the dead. These articles, together with unidentified articles, shall be sent in sealed packets accompanied by statements giving all peculiars necessary for the identification of the deceased owners, as well as by a complete list of the contents of the parcel. Article 20. Parties to the conflict shall ensure that burial at sea of the dead, carried out individually as far as circumstances permit, is preceded by a careful examination, if possible by a medical examination of the bodies, with the view to confirming death, establishing identity, and enabling a report to be made. Where a double identity disc is used, one half of the disc should remain on the body. If the dead persons are landed, the provisions of the Geneva Convention for the Amelioration of the Condition of the Wounded and Sick in the Armed Forces in the Field, August 12, 1949, shall be applicable. Article 21. Parties to the conflict may appeal to the charity of the commanders of neutral merchant vessels, yachts, or other craft to take them on board and care for the wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons, and to collect of the dead. Vessels of any kind responding to this appeal, and those having their own accord collected wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons, shall enjoy special protection and facilities to carry out such assistance. They may in no case be captured on account of any such transport, but in the absence of any promise to the contrary, they shall remain liable to capture for any violations of neutrality they may have committed.